If a web application does not properly validate the host header value in the HTTP request, then it might be vulnerable to HTTP host header injection attacks. During this video, we look at a simple scenario where an attacker injects a malicious payload into the HTTP host header to bypass application access control to perform administrative actions without having valid admin credentials. For the purpose of this video, we use a lab from Web Security Academy called Host Header Authentication Bypass, and you can find the link to this lab in the video description. To solve this lab, we need to access the admin panel and then delete user callers. Alright, let's get started by clicking on Access the Lab. From the lab description, we know the application has an admin panel, but we don't know the URL for accessing this panel. Let's see if we can find any information about the admin panel URL from the robots.txt file. So we go to the address bar and add /robots.txt at the end of the URL and submit the new URL. Looking at the contents of robots.txt file, we can see the /admin directory, which should be the URL for the admin panel. Now let's see if we can access the admin panel by directly browsing to it. First we turn on the burp intercept, then we go to the address bar and add /admin at the end of the application homepage URL and submit the request. In burp we see the HTTP GET request for accessing the admin panel. Let's forward this request. The application returns 401 HTTP response code, indicating the lack of valid authentication credentials for the requested page. In the browser, we see an interesting message. The admin interface is only available to local users. So if we could manage to find a way to submit this request, as it comes from a local user, then we should be able to bypass application access control and get access to admin panel without having valid admin credentials. Let's go back to the application homepage by clicking on Home from top right corner of the screen. We need to do some experiment with the HTTP requests and closely observe the application behavior to see if we can find a way to modify the HTTP request so that the application assumes the request is submitted by local users. Make sure the burp intercept is on, then either refresh the page or click on Home button. Looking at the HTTP request, we notice the host header and its value is the application domain name. Let's see if the application is vulnerable to host header injection. When testing for host header vulnerabilities, the first step is to change the host header to a random value to see how the application behaves. In burp, we go to host header and replace its value with a random invalid domain name, then forward the request. The application completes the request and returns the contents of the home page. Even though in HTTP request we changed the host header to an unexpected value, we could still access the application. This is an indication that the web application is probably vulnerable to host header injection attack. You might ask this question that why even though the host header was an invalid domain name, we could still access the application. One of the reasons for such behavior is that some web application servers are configured with the default option, which is the application domain name. And if they receive an HTTP request that contains a domain name that they don't recognize, they would use that default option and provide access to the application. Now let's see if we can exploit the host header injection vulnerability to get access to the admin panel. In the web browser, we go to the address bar and add /admin at the end of the URL and submit this URL. In burp, we go to the host header and change its value to localhost. Then we forward the request. We get 200 HTTP response code, and the application returns the contents of the admin panel. Looking at the web browser, we see the admin panel and the list of the users. Since in the HTTP request we changed the host header to localhost, the application assumed the request was coming from an internal user, and as a result provided access to the admin panel. So by exploiting a simple host header injection vulnerability, we managed to bypass the application access control and get access to the admin panel. For the next step, we need to delete user callers. Be sure burp intercept is on, and in the web browser, we click on delete next to the callers username. In burp, we see the request for deleting user calls. For obvious reasons, if we forward this request as it is, the application access control would refuse to perform the requested action and delete user as we are not the admin user. So we need to change the host header to localhost to ensure the application assumes the request is coming from the local users. Let's go ahead and remove the current domain name in host header and replace it with localhost. Then we forward the request. In the web browser, we get the message that we solved the lab, and by looking at the admin panel, we see user calls is deleted successfully. In this video, we saw a simple scenario where we could exploit host header injection vulnerability to bypass application access control and perform sensitive admin actions without having valid admin credentials. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a like and also be sure to subscribe to the channel as I upload new videos every week.